around real estate specifically, what was the drive to make that your thing? Because you'd said, like, I wanted to get into something that was more entrepreneurial, that was more your own. Why that?
I have had the good fortune of working in lots of different industries for lots of different companies with very different styles and approaches. And one of the things that always hit me and has stayed with me ever since is just when you're working for somebody else, very often a lot of the things that you do, especially if you're the type of person that like just can't help but always give it your all, which is my personality. Your efforts are not always rewarded, let alone recognized. And again, it's not that I felt unappreciated, but I felt that I brought something to the table that I could do more with if I was in charge. And so I had, I've had options over the years and considered doing things with friends, but nothing ever really got off the ground. And anyway, this was just, again, because I came at this from an incredibly fortunate position in that I had access to all these successful, high-level people that were doing this all over, at that point, North America, that I could reach out to for advice if I needed it. So I think I was in a safe enough place that it was still scary to give up. It's not like I had great savings or anything that I could sit back on. This was definitely one of those trial by fire decisions where if this doesn't work out, this is going to wipe me out most likely. But you kind of need that kind of incentive to do it right, I think, and or at least I do. I wasn't sure that it was going to work. I had no idea. I remember having a conversation with somebody. I can't remember what line of work they were in, but I told them I'm thinking about leaving my job and going out on my own. But I told them I've done everything, or not everything, but I've done a lot of things. But the one thing I've never done is sales. And the guy was on the phone and the guy was laughing. He's like, doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, a janitor, what real estate agent, everybody's in sales. Everything is sales. So he's like, you've been in sales the whole time. Like, just this is a great move for you. Just do it. And that was it. But ultimately, the underlying motivation was that I wanted to do something. I wanted to start something of my own where the success or failure of the business depended on me and not on anybody else. I didn't have to answer to anyone else, and I could do things in my own way. Because real estate is also one of those industries that stereotypes about real estate exist for a reason, mm-hmm. and those stereotypes don't reflect the person that I am. I'm not attracted to the lifestyle that you see on these real estate TV shows and all that, and that's not what I was after. But it's also, I saw that that's not what it had to be, mm-hmm. and I wasn't sure that it was going to work. I didn't, because I am not despite that I'm on a podcast right now, I'm not a self-promoting person in any way. Like, it's not that there's nothing that I'm ashamed of, but I also just, it's not my comfort zone to tell the world about how great I am. Like, it's just like I'm confident, and I know that what I represent, and that's good enough for me. I don't need I don't feel the need to showboat. And I was worried that that was going to be one of the requirements of being successful in real estate. And like a decade into this, I can confident. I can't tell everyone else how to do it, but it has worked for me without having to put billboards of myself around the city. I do have signs. Reluctantly, I have signs, and they say my name, but they do not have my face on them. My business cards do not have my face on them, like all those cliches of real estate. Mm. I think, as I take a deep breath, I think I've managed to avoid and proven that you can do this without being that guy.
Yeah. Because I want to get to the actual industry in a few minutes, and I like what you said. Stereotypes exist about the industry for a reason, but also a lot of industries. Like, right. I'm in a fortunate position where I get to work across a really broad amount of industries at various levels. And, I'll meet those people where it's like, oh yeah, I've seen you on TV. Like,
Right.
You're that person. You've been a character in a movie. They're rare, but their impact is huge in both a positive in some ways, but in a negative way, where it's like people know those stereotypes because they make such a big impact, often in a negative way, but they certainly don't count for like the vast majority of people who
Right.
work in any industry. And there's all sorts of people who work in an industry. And real estate, very specifically, I feel has kind of become an increasingly challenging topic for some that are based on like how people have done the business, but also, of course, the economy and where people who want to get into real estate find themselves now, even from a renting position.
Right.
But before we get to that piece, there's two things that stand out to me. The first is you seem like a person who's been ultimately very willing to bet on yourself. Is that something that was natural for you? Like, yeah, I'm just going to do this thing? Or is that something you learned over time?
I think it's something that I learned over time, and I think it's something that is born out of necessity, not out of like some like crazy confidence. It's not that like in any aspect of my life, whether it's music or anything else, it's not like I started this because I got something that nobody else has and I'm going to make it. It's like I'm going to try this, I'm going to do my best, and there's so many factors that influence whether this is going to succeed or not. And I think it's not about, for me anyway, it's not about this yearning for success. It's about a willingness to fail. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and this might be the most catastrophic failure of my life. I might be the laughing stock of my friends, but let's roll the dice and see what happens. I'm willing to do the work. So I think that ultimately that's where it comes from, and especially when you're younger and starting out and don't have a lot to lose, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, go back to scratch and start again.
But it's interesting you say that, because like when I said that, your first thing was like, well, it's not from like a crazy ego space. I don't think I'm the greatest guy in the world. So sometimes people bet on themselves because they can't see the real reflection in the mirror. They've got these like self-inflated ideas of themselves, either from ego or just they're not good at gauging what they can bring. But other times people are very hesitant to bet on themselves, like people who really should, like people who have something they can totally add. The reason I bring it up here is because that willingness to fail. Let's start with the place, and I think it's important to acknowledge there's a certain amount of privilege that some people have. I can't speak to your life story, but I know that like the times where I've like bet on myself is like, for most cases, except for when I got older, it's like if I totally failed, I wouldn't lose everything. Like, I wouldn't end up in a terribly compromised situation. There's people I could rely on and people I could go to. So when I speak about betting on myself, I always have to keep that in mind. I assume the same could be said for you.
Yes and no. I obviously there's varying degrees of this, but I mean, certainly I would risk a full reset. I think that that is an inarguable fact, no matter what challenges I've had to overcome over the years.
Yeah. The reason I want to put that at the ground level is like, I think the idea, I'm like a big believer in believing yourself. Like, and I don't mean in the corny way of like, follow your passions. Like, yes, do that, but also do it reasonably so that you can build a productive lifestyle for yourself.
Right.
Productive and healthy. But like, I do believe in betting on yourself, whether that's like shooting for that next job in someone else's company or in some big company or starting your own business, whatever it is. The thing that I always want to encourage people to do is like not settle.
Right.
And settling doesn't mean you're sitting in some like totally meaningless, shitty job that you hate and you don't make much money. I know people who make a shit ton of money and are fucking miserable, and they've settled in that. The idea of betting on yourself is like really taking the steps to like figure out what is going to make me the most productive and happy in my life, and take those steps. So if we start at the ground level of like you and I and many people kind of have a certain amount of privilege to go out and start their own businesses. But there's also a certain level of like, well, I'm also totally willing to eat shit and fail. And that's the interesting part of your story, man, because at any of these parts, you could have totally eaten shit and failed. And I think in some cases, you've probably had
I definitely did, yeah.